Welcome to the Art of Succession podcast with Barrett Young. Join us as we explore the strategies, stories, and insights that shape the journey of leadership transitions and business success. No matter where you find yourself along the journey, this is the podcast where you'll find the tools to make it happen.
I feel like at that point you're married to a job while at the same time have a ton of other people dependent upon you. And I'll always take this call to just learn information. So you're thinking about coming, what they value, what they don't value, like what culture is. At some point we're going to need to sell. So you might as well like establish and build the relationships. I was stressed out, but I don't think I really realized it until after I'd actually sold the business.
My name is Barrett Young, and this is the Art of Succession podcast. My guest today is Adam Shay, who started a CPA firm in 2010 and then took an exit in 2023. And today he's going to tell us what he's been doing since. Adam, thank you for being a guest on the Art of Succession.
Thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Sure. So to get started, what's going through your mind? What's the impetus for wanting to be a guest on the Art of Succession and talk to other people that might be in your position?
I think in a lot of what I've also been doing on LinkedIn is just sharing lessons I learned about business and both building and growing the business, but also the exit process and then afterwards, and then kind of decompressing and realizing, how burnout I was, how much I'd been neglecting my health, and just wanted to kind of share that message and tell people there are, you're not, if you feel stuck in your business, there's a couple ways to, get unstuck, one of which is an exit, but, that there are opportunities out there. You don't have to hold your business until you're, 70 years old or you pass it on to your kids or whatever. Sometimes, maybe a head scratcher to people externally as to why I sold my firm, a successful firm at 50 years old or so, 49. But, it's just kind of felt like the right move at the right time.
Awesome. All right. So let's get into the firm. You started it in 2010. Did you start it with anybody? Had you been self-employed before? Did you start it from scratch, going out on your own? Walk me through that just a little bit.
Started it from scratch on my own. 3 weeks before my first son was born, kind of knew I needed to take the leap then, or I was going to be too scared or have too many obligations to do so. Also, it was good from a timing and family perspective because I unfortunately wasn't super busy that first year. And so I had time for my son and my family and my wife, that first sort of spring when he was born, basically in January, right at the start of tax season. And that's was my initial focus was doing tax work. And so.
Okay. And you'd been in public accounting for a number of years at other firms, or did you come out of the Big Four? Had you been in small business before?
I ended up, so when I got out of college, I was a software developer, designer, tester, business analyst in fintech space. Decided that really wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and relocated, took a buyout from my job, relocated, was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I thought I wanted to do something business-wise, running my own business, kind of had always been an interest of mine. My mom suggested that, I just find a temporary seasonal job doing taxes. I was good at math, that stuff. And I ended up managing what was started as 6 Jackson Hewitt tax locations. And we grew it to, I think, 13 or 14 over a couple year period. And then it was kind of at that time I was, really underselling myself and my value. And either it was buy in there or go out on my own and kind of do something on my own. And I really decided I wanted to take that bet on myself. And also just not retail. I wanted to focus more on planning and being proactive in the business advisor than just, cranking out tax returns to retail customers.
Gotcha. Okay. And I presume you became a CPA while you were there at Jackson Hewitt then to launch on your own?
When I went on my own, I did not have my license. So I had a new baby, new business, and I was also studying for the CPA exam. So I did not sleep.
All right, awesome. And did you have any clients come over from the previous? Was there a non-compete there? How did that launch go?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much from scratch. Maybe I don't know if a customer or two tracked me down, but I wasn't soliciting, wasn't supposed to solicit, had a vague sort of non-compete. Um, and really the clientele that I'd previously been working with probably generally wasn't what I wanted to be working with moving forward, with just complexity and just those looking for advice versus just say an income tax return that they need to file.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. I mean, we're skipping over a lot of the founder piece here, but I assume a couple of years of that. How talk me through growth and how you got that to a position 13 years later where you had something of value to sell.
Yeah. Um, so kind of took a couple years to really get to the point where I felt I was ready to hire someone. Hired, an admin, hired a intern, and then eventually hired a CPA, and then just kind of continued to hire and grow from there. Did a lot of, grew through one back in 2010. No accounting firms in our area really had websites, so that was an easy way to grow. Google Maps and stuff was pretty easy picking. And so people would start starting to search up, yet the competition wasn't there. And then two, just doing good work and word of mouth from your clients. And three, getting out and, shaking hands, kissing babies, doing all the networking, lots of time doing that and just kind of getting to know people and developing the name and reputation. And we're fortunate enough, like our town's not tiny, but it's also not huge. So kind of once you develop a good name, it just was pretty easy to, get referrals and just people know if someone asks, hey, who do I know? Who do I need to help me with my accounting and tax stuff? They'd say Adam Shay, even if they didn't know me because they knew someone who knew me or had just heard that we were good or whatever. Um,
Gotcha. Okay.
and and
Go ahead.
and we at the peak, I think pre-pandemic, we were maybe close to 20 folks on our staff.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Um, so somewhere between 15 and 20. And then, um, pandemic hit, accountants like were in even more short supply than they were previously, just because they could work anywhere and get a big city pay. Living here, working here in Wilmington, NC, people just were reprioritizing things, and so, I mean, I don't know. You never know what would have happened if I'd still be a firm owner if the pandemic hadn't hit and the world hadn't changed like it did from an employment and priority perspective. But it definitely, changed and had an impact on things and um, kind of made it more challenging. And where it really wasn't that. I mean, I liked the business before, liked what I was doing, view business as a game, and it just stopped being as fun. And that's, hard. You feel like at that point you're married to a job while at the same time have a ton of other people dependent upon you at the same time, and the other people being the employees that were working for us.
Gotcha. Pre-pandemic, were you guys remote? Were you in office? I know being local, there's a tendency to take local business in office. So
Mostly in office, but we did have like VPN access and some remote access, and people could do stuff here and there. We actually like adjusted that, and in 2018, our area got hit really badly by a hurricane, and
mm-hmm.
there was power outage for a week or two right around the extension, the September 15th extension deadline. And so it got me to rethink like what contingency plans look like, so that we had all these people that had left town. I think everyone but me had left town, but they couldn't do anything because our server wasn't accessible, because the power was out in our office.
Um, over those 10 years, at least leading up to the pandemic, how much of your work that you were doing was annual transactional, versus how much of it was kind of recurring income?
Yeah, a lot of it started out transactional, and then we kind of shifted. Like we shifted probably around 2018 as well, to where we weren't going to do like if we were going to do an income tax return for someone, we were also going to do income tax projections and planning with them. So that gave us at least two touch points. or more during the year, depending on the frequency of what they did there. So we really kind of tried to shift a little bit from the transactional side of things, but it took us a while. It probably wasn't until 2020 or somewhere around there. Like prior to that, we were not doing any, your typical residual work or ongoing work is accounting work on our side. We were not doing any of that. We were kind of strictly tax and forensic accounting and tax resolution, and didn't really add accounting and bookkeeping until much later in the life cycle of the business.
Okay. Between the pandemic and between when you sold then in those 3 years?
Yeah, probably somewhere in that time frame, maybe a little bit before the pandemic, but it took us a little bit to just get going, because anytime you have a new line of business, you're making an investment before kind of the revenue gets there. We probably initially, and I've did this multiple times, and hopefully people can learn from this. I always tell people, like, hire more senior than you think you need and you can afford, because it's just, in the long run, it's cheaper than hiring someone who's not senior enough, that doesn't work out, or that doesn't carry as much of the load as they should from you, the business owner, and stuff like that.
I mean, that leads into my next question, was going to be going into the, the, the years leading up to the burnout. How much of the work came across your desk? How much of it was dependent on you, out of 20? And I assume during the pandemic, you said some people took other jobs. So what size were you in 2023 when you sold the company?
Probably around 15 or so people.
Okay, so about a quarter, but not like half or more. You didn't shrink the firm drastically. So how much of that work was around you and falling on your shoulders in those 3 to 5 years leading up to the acquisition?
Not that much as far as specifically like client work, but like, and we had built out our model where we had our accountants, we viewed them as relationship managers. And so we weren't a model where our partner would do all the communications to the clients, like our staff would do that. But at the end of the day, it was still like more complex stuff. I think if I had to do ever again, I would have taught people how to fish better and problem solve better. And, you kind of, if you're not intentional about it, can build a culture of like people coming to you when they have a problem. And instead of coming to you with a potential solution or solutions to consider, they just kind of dump their problem on your plate. And then you're carrying that burden and stress.
So not really the traditional problem in our profession of you had to sign every tax return, you had to review everyone, you had to do every client meeting, but there were other stresses there that were involved. Is that right?
That, and yeah, and I was just spending a lot of time like between, just turnover, hire, like really what kind of burned me out most was probably just dealing with HR and hiring and feeling like I was always like, that's all I was ever doing. And by the time I was like, oh, this person's great, or we're finally smooth sailing for a bit. And, the next day, like someone
Two more
resigns.
people quit.
Yeah. And the size business we had, we were like big enough for a little bit of burden to spread when someone left, but really not. And we didn't have any like extra capacity. I mean, again, if I had to do over the growth kind of cycle again, I probably would have invested a little bit more in having that additional capacity, earlier than I needed it, or more often than I needed it, just to add a little bit of a buffer and just kind of support future growth.
I want to get into the burnout and that decision here quickly, but before we do, how much of the sales process was still you? Did you have other people bring business in, or were you still doing those initial calls and onboarding and stuff like that?
Um, some of the team was doing it, some of the more senior team members, but I was doing a good bit of it. Um, and like the bigger deals, I was kind of more involved in, just trying to, you know, the team's close rate was not going to be as successful as my close rate. And not that I'm a better salesperson or that I'm naturally a salesperson, but I'd done it more. And then two, I think there's some credence to like someone trying to buy from you if they know they're dealing with the owner or someone, a director or some or partner or whatever it is, than say just, some, you know, 25, 30-year-old accountant that's trying to help them.
Yeah, I've seen that. And certainly as owners, partners, we have the ability to make concessions where necessary and also to take a harder line possibly than somebody as in a sales position would take. So yeah, I understand that. All right. So talk to me about the initial signs of burnout. How long did it take for you to recognize it as burnout? Let's talk about this.
So I don't think I really realized that I was burnout or that everything I was dealing with. I mean, I was stressed out, but like I don't think I really realized it until after I'd actually like sold the business and the wore off, and I kind of dusted myself off and kind of did some reflection and just that's kind of when it really hit me the most. Um, my and so we haven't talked about this, but I did have a small minority partner in the business, and she really wanted to get out too. And she just was the one that headed up our tax side and did not want to do tax anymore. And so part of it too was also that I didn't want to go through the process of rebuilding an entire tax department or being in charge of the tax department myself. And so trying to find a good way, a good win for us to, um, at least monetize somewhat everything that we had built, um, over time and kind of allow her an out that provides some income on that out. And then, I looked at different options or different acquirers where some of which one or both of us maybe would have stayed on if we'd been bought by, say, a more traditional big firm. Whereas there are other avenues where, my partner stayed for the first 6 months, kind of as a transition period with the buyer. And then I was to stay on for a year, and I stayed on longer than that, about 2.5 years or year and a half. I'm sorry, a year and a half as an employee, and then still doing some contract work with them at this point.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So it was more the minority partner's interest or desire to get out. How long had she been in the business at this point? And I assume she earned her way into the partnership.
Yeah, she had probably been in by the time we sold 7 or so years, I'd say roughly 7 or 8.
So about half the time.
Yeah. And she had demonstrated herself, but she had bought into her equity with the business. So she
Okay.
had some monetary skin in the game and not just earned equity in the game.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point. Burnout is hard to recognize when you're in it. It's much more obvious that first tax season when you're out and you're like, wow, I'm not stressed right now. It's just January.
And yeah, and I don't know if it's like because I see it and know it now or talk about it myself, but I feel like in the last like year or two, especially like and it might just be this sphere of people I'm within on LinkedIn, but a lot of people talk about it or talking more focused on trying to have balance as they, build and grow a business and stuff like that.
So if your partner wants out, I guess what's going through your mind to start to say, yeah, I could at 50 see myself. You can't retire completely, so you've got to do something else. What's going through your mind to say, I think I'm ready to pack this one up and do something else versus I'm going to stay on, find another partner, find a partial acquisition, sell off the tax practice, something along those lines?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was just kind of the, for me, like when I looked at it, do I want to do this? Like, say for another 10 years. And I'm not one of those people that would want to work till I'm 75 and die at the desk or something like that. And the business, as near and dear as it was to me, was not my life. But I just kind of looked at it and, is this really what I want to do? And like post pandemic, it was not. And it was just like, just kind of really just tired of hiring people, training people, bringing people on board, and just kind of dealing with, with impacts of decisions other people have made, meaning employees that have an impact on me. And, um, and my stress levels and everything else. And I'm not faulting them. Everyone's got to do what they need to do right for their life, but it was just not a good spot to be. I didn't feel like, um, and there were a couple like, and so maybe taking a step back, we would get acquisition calls because we were in a growing market. We were growing ourselves. We were kind of the firm to be in our area. And so we would get calls, and I always like over probably 5 years, if not earlier, before we sold. Like we always said, I always told my partner, I'll always take this call to just learn information, see who's thinking about coming, what they value, what they don't value, like what culture is. At some point, we're going to need to sell, so you might as well like establish and build the relationships. And so, um, I'd kind of had those calls, and then, had talks, but not really. And then I reached out to a couple of them and said, we might be more serious about this. Those were more regional, national or statewide firms.
Consolidation,
but,
more kind
yeah, consolidation kind of things. One or two of them I entertained, like, we got to LOI and kind of did some due diligence and other stuff, or actually three others. We got at least LOI. One or two we got to some due diligence, but like, I was considering staying on there, and my buyout portion being an equity interest for the most part, in the acquiring firm.
Okay. And so you told me before the call you ended up taking it was a searcher that was looking to get out of a corporate job and buy an existing practice, an existing cash flowing business. So this was one of the three that you entertained that had contacted you before. Sorry, before we get into that, that's interesting that you're like, I'm going to talk to him, because I let those emails go to spam. I just like block, move it to unfocused, get rid of it, because I'm not taking it seriously. But your position was, I at least want to be educated by this. Okay.
And yeah, time was, obviously a value commodity to me. But again, I just kind of, as we viewed the world, thought it was a smart use of time. If we did that, I don't know, call it like once or twice a year or once or twice a quarter, just depending on it.
Different time. Okay, I
Yeah,
gotta remind myself of that.
It's not today.
I feel like I'm getting 2 or 3 of those a week right now.
Yeah.
So, okay, all right, that makes sense. So talk to me about the negotiation with the searcher then.
Yeah, and prior to that, we had a deal that went to due diligence, and they just tried to renegotiate the price during due diligence, and just kind of did not. I just did not. One, I wasn't happy with the price they tried to renegotiate it to, but two, I did not feel like I'd want to stay on as an employee with like just kind of people that are going to do that. And so it just didn't feel like the best fit. And so that was right before the start of one of our tax seasons. And, we kind of thought we were going to go through tax season, maybe after tax season, the summer would do something, but this buyer popped up through a broker, right at the start of tax season. And so in the spring of 2023, I was doing all this stuff behind the scenes and due diligence, with the buyer during tax season when life is very busy. But I just kind of sucked it up and did what I needed to do to send it over the finish line. And I think as an accounting firm, I think it's safe to say or assume we generally have probably better records and financials and stuff together than most people. But it still like blew my mind how like tedious and like time consuming supporting due diligence is. And it's not like it was something I had my wife help me with some of this stuff, but it's not like I didn't want to tell my team and didn't tell our team until really far along in the process. And even then, a lot of the team didn't learn until we actually announced that we'd been acquired. So I just had to do most of the grunt work myself, as far as supporting, providing financials, meeting with buyer frequently, just kind of answering questions, helping push along there. So they use an SBA loan, and so there was just a lot of just red tape related to that, and just kind of how the agreements had to be specific to the SBA, and just other stuff that just was a lot of. It was stressful, and even up until like a week or two, or at least the last month before, it was like there was something in our lease that made the SBA not happy, and we were having to try to get information from our landlord where he's trying to use the the takeover of the lease as a way to raise the rent, which was not going to work for the buyer. So everyone's like, I kind of found as a process, everyone who found they had any sort of leverage from you, that you were going through an acquisition and had any sort of leverage, tried to get their piece of it.
Stuff that you're not prepared for going in.
Yeah.
So, okay. So how long did you and your partner end up staying on? Did your partner stay through another tax season for the transition?
No, she stayed on from June of 2023, which is when we sold, until December of 2023. So she did not stay on for another tax season. Um, she helped train another tax manager and kind of help just generally document processes and do some additional stuff. I mean, we were pretty good with documenting processes and SOPs to begin with, but you still even like can always revisit and do some cleanup on those if you're not going to be around, to just make sure they're super detailed.
Yeah. So I presume this searcher was a CPA that was in corporate, because I don't know what the North Carolina laws are, but buying a CPA firm is not an option for everyone. Is that correct?
So she is not a CPA, and we are an accounting firm now and not a CPA firm. And so that's the specific distinction.
Gotcha. Okay. So your partner staying on for, through the end of the year, that's a lot of introductions and a lot of passing off of relationships, I assume.
Yep, correct. But I think it was like the fact that the company was named Adam Shay CPA, and I was sticking around for that first year. And a lot of the reason I was sticking around is because we had an earn out component to the acquisition. And so I wanted to stay around and try to impact that as much as I could.
Gotcha. Okay. And what's your role in the company at this point? Since you're not tax manager, you're not reviewing the tax returns. What's your role for that year here?
I was director of VCFO and advisory services, which was a new line of business. And like, I mean, we'd done some virtual CFO, we'd done a bunch of advisory, but like it was one of those services I wanted to add, but like staff really couldn't run with and lead. And I couldn't do that at the same time while I was kind of running and managing and growing the business. And so thought process with the choir going into it was like, I would be director of that. I would get back to more client work, help with transition and stuff like that. Maybe stay on indefinitely as an employee. Hard to know until you get in there. And also continue to do sales, be one of the salesperson along with the new owner.
Okay. Awesome. So making sure she's up to speed, ready to take over, but you also just saw this as an opportunity to experiment and grow. I mean, you said accounting and bookkeeping really only came in the 2 years or so leading up to this. So you're now growing in a department of a company you no longer have that's not going to affect the value of that. What was that like for you?
Yeah, definitely a little
freeing,
some in some ways free, in other ways you're like, all right, I'm, part of my compensation, like I guess I can say this, I was undercompensated for that first year just because like I needed to be around for the earnout.
Tend to be.
Yeah. At least that's my take on it. And so, but the earnout was pretty significant. We hit 100% of the earnout. So that was important. And so I view sort of my overall compensation during that time, some portion of the earnout as well.
I hope that you've enjoyed part 1 of my discussion with Adam Shay. In part 2, we're going to get into burnout and the mindset change that comes from a business owner who's sold their companies. And you can watch that episode right here. We have new episodes twice a month with business owners and their own succession stories. If you'd like to be a guest on the Art of Succession podcast, our link is down in the description below. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with others. And I want to thank you for watching The Art of Succession.